So somehow it doesn't show me as a speaker. I don't know why. Anyway, I want to welcome everybody who showed up so far to our little short webinar. The webinar is these are a little series of 3 webinars that I put together just to offer resources that I have to the community, since most of us are dealing with losses and difficulties from the coronavirus. And so I wanted to share from my bucket of resources, things I had that might be useful for my community. So this is the second of 3 planned little free webinars. The first one was dealing with fear, and this one is dealing with loss. And many of us have experienced losses of different kinds. And so let's see, I'm going to go to my slides right now because I know most of you have plans at lunch hour, and so I want to make sure that we stay within our time frame. So I'm going to, and we have 2 of us here trying to run the tech here, so I'm trying to find my slide sharing feature. There it is. And I will go to the PowerPoint. So I titled this webinar, and I'm going to ask people to turn off your video, please, unless you want to be, because we are going to make some clips for YouTube, and unless you want to have your face on the YouTube clip, you will need to turn that link off. So I titled this little webinar "Farewell," as in goodbye, and "Farewell," to go well, or which is from the original French word, which was faire, F-A-I-R-E, which meant to do or to make. And so the point of the title is that saying goodbye is a normal part of human experience, and learning to do that in a way where we also fare well, we do well, is an important life skill that we all have to master. And of course, in the time of coronaviruses, there are a lot of losses piling up for people, and some of them are different kinds of losses. So someone sent me this quote, and I really appreciated it. "When the winds of change blow, some build walls, and others build windmills." So today we're gonna look at the walls, and we're gonna look at the windmills that we could build. And are we recording, Don? Yeah, great. So here we go. So our agenda is going to be looking at what is loss, and looking at 3 different kinds of loss that researchers and people who work with people who have experienced loss and grief are dealing with. We're going to talk about the ways that people move through loss, and what I've discovered by looking at loss from a physical side, not just the social, emotional, mental side. And I have 2 little activities that you can join me in: the Moving Joints activity, and we'll discuss the Rewriting the Story of Self activity. And finally, we'll just talk a little about what it means to be healed and ride the waves of life. So on that note, here is a kind of functional working definition of loss. So our brains actually work like virtual reality machines. We perceive only a limited amount of what's in the world for us to know. And I define loss as the absence, or the projected absence, of a valued experience. And what we value the most in our daily life are how people around us make us feel. The ongoing experience of the flow of life when we're with people, or we're doing things, or in a workplace, that gives us a sense of self, that gives us a sense of orientation in the world. And so that helps us know ourselves. We sort of know ourselves by the reflections of who we are that we get from other people. The mind is really so programmed to feed itself by and know itself through outside experience, that even if you put someone in isolation, they will still manufacture, they'll hallucinate, they'll make up a world. So our world is really precious to us. It's how we know who we are, it's how we know that we are. And so when something changes in that world, it literally rocks our boat in a really big way. And I'm going to just take a pause, Don. If you, as co-host, can turn off the bell when people come in, that'd be really great. So, pardon me. So let's take a deeper look at the experience of loss. So there's great research out now that shows from the ability to scan the brain that emotional pain is physical, that the same parts of the brain are used to experience emotional pain as we have experienced when we have a physical pain of loss. So the, when I realized that, I thought, well, let me look at what happens when people actually like come back from the war in Iraq. There was a lot of vets that came back missing parts of their body. Like it doesn't get more profound than actually losing part of yourself. And when I started to look at what happens for somebody who goes through that kind of really so intimate and personal disruption and loss, I realized why it's so important for us to have support and containment. Because the first thing that happens is that all of our automatic programs, and we have these for social relations as well as the relationship we have with our body and the world, all of these programs are disrupted. All of the automatic ways we knew how to get through the world and get through life, they are thrown into disorganization. So if a vet comes back and they're missing a leg, for example, they can't even get up and go to the bathroom anymore in the normal way. All of their programs get disrupted. And this happens for us too, as well, when we lose a person or we lose a job. All of our normal patterns are disrupted. We fall into disorganization. And for us as human beings, because our self is sort of made in conjunction with the world, this is very disorienting. So it helps a lot when we have someone to support us, someone to reflect back to us that we are and that we're okay and that we're still existing. That's why a support person, even one precious person that can be there when you need them, or just a container. Like if you're going through a job loss and you're doing it together, that social structure provides the support that we need to be disorganized. What I realized when I looked at vets and the processes that they went through is that the disorganization period is necessary. The old patterns have been disrupted. They they have to be disrupted for change to happen. So that's why I like the quote I have from Michael Singer here at the bottom. He says, "Perhaps change only takes place when there is sufficient reason to overcome the inertia of everyday life." So we sort of don't have a choice about it. And of course, the old patterns have a strong hold on us. So there is resistance, frustration. We are our world is upside down. We can't move in the way that we did. We feel blocked and impeded. This is a normal response. The anger is a normal response to finding a desired pathway blocked. At some point, though, we wear out. We get tired from the blocking, and we begin to engage with reality the way it is. So the soldier will begin to work with the physical therapist or work with reality the way it is. We begin to give up our resistance and anger and to work with reality the way it is. So there's an engagement with reality. And it's really important for us to have the support and containment to get to this point. Once we begin to engage with reality, the world the way it is, us the way we are, then then we can begin to reorganize. We can begin to learn new patterns of engagement and behavior. And we begin to emerge back into coherence, back into a pattern of organization to have responses that are automatic. We don't have to think anymore about how to move through the world. We begin to sort of heal and return to a kind of state of flow and integration with our world. So that's the ideal pathway. And whether it's a social loss, like a loss of status, maybe being demoted is a kind of loss, whether it's an ambiguous loss, which we'll talk about in a moment, where you've been furloughed and not sure if you'll get your job back. These stages seem to be normal, but also nonlinear. We can be engaged with reality and then go back to frustration and disorganization. It's kind of a bumpy ride, and the support and containment, the consistency of that helps us actually move through and emerge into a new form, a new self. So that was really helpful for me when I saw that. And then as I looked more deeply into the kinds of losses experienced by people, I realized that there are really three kinds. There's the physical loss. We've been talking about what happens to a vet, for instance. But there's also the loss of a beloved person, an animal that's woven into your life, even an object, a home, for instance, is a huge loss, or an experience that you treasured. I mean, it could be just you were walking on the beach and now somebody has built a house. So there's the actual physical change of something in your world. And we don't think of our social worlds as having physical components. But of course, we're used to having that person in our world. I remember when my husband's brother died very suddenly and surprisingly. He was an expert in the field of geology, and we were used to just picking up the phone and calling him. And I can't tell you how many times there was that moment where we would go to pick up the phone and realize Larry was gone. So it's a real disruption in our world when something beloved disappears, something that we've kind of woven into the fabric of our life and our world. Now, physical losses are something that people can see, and they're more likely to evoke a supportive response from somebody who is aware of your loss, perhaps not affected the way you are, but aware of it. And we still don't give enough time for us to rebuild, to go through this whole process and rebuild a new world for ourselves. For example, I had there's a colleague both of us knew who worked at the same company we both did many years ago, and she lost her daughter, 20-year-old daughter, in a car accident. And the company gave her 3 days to come back to work. Now, I'm sure her body was back, but I'm sure her soul was not. It usually takes a full year of what they call a mourning year because we have to go through all those experiences that are marked by the cycle of the calendar and rebuild them with the absence of that person. So physical losses we're more familiar with. And we do have ways of being supportive of people as they go through that cycle of rebuilding a world without the person in the way that they were there, some kind of memories, but not the real thing of the person. So the second kind of loss are what is known as ambiguous losses. And these are also these can be the loss of a feeling. So these are losses that occur without clear closure or an understanding of what happened. So for example, families that had uh, a member of the family who was missing in action. There's no closure. There's no body that comes back. There's no finality to it. This leaves the person searching for answers and complicates and delays the process of grieving. It can result in unresolved grief. And there's some lovely work that's been done at this. The woman, Pauline Boss, who created this website. But it can be things like moving to a new city and having trouble getting established and not knowing kind of what happens to the old group of friends and how you're going to manage in the new one, or aging, the loss of faculties of your body and not knowing quite what you're going to have. It can be losing a job. Many folks have been furloughed with the understanding that they're going to be rehired, but it's very ambiguous. And so it leaves you in this state of kind of unresolved loss. And it's really important to find a way to process, to find a way to create a self that can be in the kind of liminal space between what you had and what might be. So we kind of have to recreate a self that's a between self and decide what we're going to keep from the old experiences, treasured memories, and what we're going to let go of. So there's a real sorting process without having finality and perhaps knowledge that people in this place have to go through. And of course, the hardest thing is our relationship with hope. Do I give up hope that I'm going to get that job and send out job applications, or do I give up hope that my soldier is going to come back at some day from the war? So it's how we make space for a possibility that we can't control and find a way to move on. The last kind of loss is potential loss. So it's kind of fear of loss and the loss of an expected future. So woman who gets dumped at the altar, for instance, or the man who gets dumped at the altar, or the fiance suddenly calls off the engagement. The person has lost a projected future. Or a promotion that doesn't happen. There's a loss of an expected future. And there's also someone you know is ill. There's the anticipated loss of a treasured person or experience. Um, and so then we end up often without really being aware of it coming into an attempt to control the future. We can end up in worry and anxiety. And other people may downplay this and say, don't worry about it, it'll happen. But the person who's anticipating this loss is then left feeling both abandoned and frightened. So it's important to understand how valued the future is for us, and the sense of who we can become and who we will be, how soothing that is, and to um, allow people ways of dealing with their worries. And again, it's a little bit of dealing with the liminal space of what would happen if that happened, of letting them really find the strengths that they might need. Reality is always different than we anticipate. So helping people kind of come to terms and peace with the fact that they can't control the future and that they may be stronger, life may be more resilient than we think. So we're going to just deal a little bit with each one of these. Again, I talked a bit about the process of disorganization, resistance, frustration, engagement with reality, reorganization, and emergence into coherence. So we're watching this fellow learn how to navigate, and just the determination on his face and the importance of the person walking beside is really critical. So that's a really critical part of. We've talked quite a bit about that, of going through that loss. Ambiguous loss for people in this state, like you're you've been given furlough so you can collect unemployment with the promise of a new job. It's really important to start naming the loss, naming the expectations, getting validation that this is indeed a loss, even though there's, quote, a promise of a new job, um, to really identify the experience of what it's like to be in that between place, and to make choices about what you will do. Just decide for yourself how I'm going to go about this. Maybe I'd say, okay, I'm going to go for I'm going to use my personal time off for 3 weeks, and then if we're not back, I'm going to go on unemployment. So it's like making a plan for yourself of how you're going to move through that unknown space. We're going to talk a little bit more about this Pennebaker, Dr. Pennebaker's writing exercise. It turns out to be very helpful for trauma as well. It's a method of beginning to allow the unconscious mind to reorganize, to encourage it to reorganize, and to reflect on your identity as a self. Who am I in this situation? What will other people think of me? So it allows you to think about your position relative to others, how you belong or don't. If there's been also a loss of social status, being unemployed is a status that most people aren't very happy to have, for instance. It also allows you to identify strengths and potential for new possibilities. Like, now there's an opening that wasn't there before. What does this create for me? And finally, the potential of loss, the fear of loss, and the feeling of loss of control, and the attempt to forestall the undesired future by worry. These patterns may often have a family of origin root to them. That's what foo is. It's the family of origin factor. We call it the foo factor. So it's helpful if you're working with somebody, or if this is you, to ask yourself, is this the first time that I've tried to deal with something I'm afraid of in this way? And to watch for maybe early self-protective strategies you might have developed. So there may be a real basis, like perhaps somebody is really ill and there is an anticipated loss. But we also have to watch out for confirmation bias. So as human beings, we try to avoid that sense of disorganization and dissonance, at all costs. And so we may be only looking for things that confirm our fears. So it's really important when you're dealing with potential loss or a loss of an expected future to name the fear. First, deal with the fear part of it. to calm the mind so the body can then become calm. So name it, test the reality of it, look for strengths, let yourself know that being in it would be different than thinking about being in it. Talk to people who've been through it. Constellation work can be helpful as well. In our last webinar, we talked about a little activity called emptying the bowl, which is a way of also relaxing the body so that the mind and body can both relax. In that way, you're going to probably meet whatever future comes to you in the most resourceful way. And I like this quote again from Michael Singer. Life was not as fragile as the voice in my head would have me believe. Often in the thick of something, we're much more resourceful and we deal with things much better than we think that we're going to be able to. So helping people move to that understanding is really helpful with this. So I want to just offer two little activities that are kind of handy for dealing with loss situations. The first one I want to say is that moving the body frees the heart and mind. So we've learned that, and I'm borrowing this one from Peter Levine, who's one of our preeminent trauma specialists, trauma healing specialists, is that the place that we process our feelings is actually in our physical body. And we have a tendency to lock down and hold as a way to try to prevent a feeling, but all that does is really trap it and lock it in our body. So this little activity of, and I'll invite you to join me and try this, of moving all the joints in your body can literally help loosen up the heart and mind. So I want you to think of a small loss. Please, not on the scale of 1 to 10, not the tens, but a 3 to 5, something, you know, maybe you lost something, like for me, I have a treasured garden knife, and if I lost that, it would feel like a loss. So maybe something small like that. Or something you were planning to do and coronavirus has now caused that to be canceled. And just hold that in your mind. Give the feeling that you have about that loss a name. Just what is it? It's like sadness or disappointment or whatever it might be. And then rate it on a scale of 1 to 10. Hopefully it's in the 3 to 5, but give it a number. And then just let that rest in your mind. Don't be dwelling on it. And now just join me and we'll start with your hands. And so I'm going to invite you just to sort of move every joint in your hands, wiggling the fingers and then just moving your wrists, really letting those really get some action. And the elbows are next, and shoulders. So be moving your hands. You can just keep everything kind of moving here, getting your shoulders to move. And then we're going to have you move your head, turning your head, letting it get some movement, your neck gets some movement, your jaw, even your tongue. People can hold quite a lot of tension in the tongue. So we're really moving everything and now twisting your torso on your chair if you can. And then if you need to stand up to move your hips in the hip joint, let them really rotate in the hip joint. And then knees, ankles, letting those move. If you can move your toes and feet, go ahead and get those going so that you probably look feeling kind of funny, but just really letting your body have free range of movement and just letting your body have that movement. And then when you finish that, just letting yourself have a moment just to settle. Sometimes something will come up as you move. You might also find that there's a feeling locked in the body. You might just give that a name and let it go. Welcome it in, let it come, let it go. And now, when you revisit that memory, notice how you are. And two things often happen when we really move. One is whatever we've been blocking, we now feel. But now we can actually process it. So now we can name it and say, okay, I'm going to just keep moving and let myself have that feeling and name it and just let it move through me. So you can just keep moving if that's what's happened for you and just kind of let that move on. And sometimes just that little bit of movement is enough to say, I can let that go. I can release that. So sometimes it will also just lighten up the experience. In either way, you're not stuck anymore in the loss. Something is moving. And that's the beginning of healing. So letting it move through you, literally move through you, letting your body move something through, letting yourself feel whatever's there and just keep it moving, keep moving. Um, Finding out perhaps now the number has changed. Perhaps the way you were holding that has shifted. So movement is a key. Gentle, slow movement is a really, there's a whole course of study around trauma pattern movement. And so it's a known field. And it's also helpful for loss. Loss is a kind of trauma. So just gentle movement, take it at the speed that works for you. Notice again this idea of naming a feeling, letting yourself have it, give it a number, keep moving and moving it through. And then over time, you might notice that it becomes less, it has less of a grip on you. And literally, your body has softened and is allowing that just to pass through, just to be part of life's flow, like this waterfall. So that's one approach. And I invite you to take that into your own world and experiment with it and there's different approaches in the field of healing and loss. Like I say, I got this one from Peter Levine. So there's lots of research there as well. The other one that's really helpful for people is, and I've even done this with quote non-writers, is to have somebody just do the Pennebaker exercise. And what I often invite people to do is to tell the story of moving from their old self who had the desired experience to the new self who has experienced the loss and moved on, recovered. It can be helpful. Sometimes people really can't write. It can be helpful to have a witness so people can tell the story. But here's the deal. We have to tell the story 4 times. So what Pennebaker found is by having people write the same story 4 days in a row, to write the story of who I was, how the experience has transformed me, and who I am now, allows the unconscious mind to get involved and start to shape the narrative. And what happens as we do that is we start to move from the disorganization, the chaos, into coherence. Because as human beings, we're natural storytellers. And our mind, our unconscious mind, will begin to help us create coherence in the story. We'll start to see pattern without even thinking about it and begin to shape a narrative. So you're to write the same story 4 days in a row. And it's not this isn't, you're not like writing a novel. This might be to set aside 20 minutes, a half hour, maybe up to an hour to write the story. And then it's not about trying to write a narrative. It's like a journalist. You're just reporting on what happened. So you do that the same, sit down and write the story 4 days in a row. Put the paper away when you're done. It's not about reading it. We're not writing a book or editing. This is about process. And just do that for 4 days and then set it aside. Sometimes people are interested. I say wait a week, and then if you want to go back and read what your stories were, you can see what you've learned from the process. It's more about mobilizing the resources that you have to acquiesce to the world the way it is. And I like this word acquiesce because it has an old meaning of to rest satisfied. The original root words, to rest satisfied, to be able to allow the world to be the way it is, and to connect the story of self with the new felt experience of self, which includes feelings that you might not have had before the loss. And then you're at a choice point. You can decide as you write the story, is this who I want to be? What choices do I have now in how I am? And so the choice point is not so much what, because that has happened, but how am I going to be with that? And this process, if you're doing it with a client or you're doing it for yourself, can open you to the possibilities of what could come next and how do I want to be with that. So it's a really lovely process. I've used it with my clients in a number of situations and found it to be very helpful. And so that's the writing the story of a new self. And the other question people have is, how do I know when I'm there? Like, are we there yet? Like the kids in the back of the car asking the parent, are we there yet? Have we made our trip? And healing is a kind of trip. We arrive in a different place than we started. And I like to say that healing is marked by the ability to surf the waves of life again, to be able to relax into the flow without the constriction and tension of the loss. So that's kind of how we know we're there and we've arrived on the other side. So that concludes our little webinar. I appreciate you being a part of this. I'd just like to summarize right now and then share a few things that are coming up. So in summary, we've looked at 3 different kinds of losses: physical, ambiguous, and potential. We've looked at the need for safe support and containment, finding even just one person that can help you move through disorganization, resistance to the change, frustration, engagement with the new reality, and the ability to reorganize and emerge into coherence again. And understanding that these are not a linear process. You can go back and forth as you move through them. We've learned that moving the body helps the emotions move too, and helps us process what we need to process to move through. And that writing and rewriting the story of self-transformation helps us achieve that coherence. So there's some hopefully useful nuggets for you in your life. We do have some more things coming up. I have one more webinar that I have on the books. It's scheduled for 2 weeks out. I don't have a link up yet, but I will, so stay on our emailing list. And this one is around togetherness, too much or too little, and how to handle the stress of that and some methods of dealing with that. And if you're enjoying these little webinars, I'm looking at building a series of them that are kind of either a la carte or in little groups, and I'm calling them Practical Wisdom for Today in Our Uncertain Times. There's a little survey you can take to help me shape that, and if you enter the survey, you're eligible to be in the drawing for this very cool deck of 52 spiritual guidance cards that's based on Michael Singer's book, The Untethered Soul. So follow that link and take the survey, and when we finish that 3rd webinar, we'll do a drawing and somebody will get that cool deck of cards. I'm also, for those of you that are following our relationships web app, some of you are constellation facilitators or coaches, we're about to launch a beta launch. It's now on a gaming platform. It's been a long project and we're so thrilled. So stay tuned. That announcement is coming. And we're giving about a month of free trial. So it gives us a chance to shake it out and you to play with it and to use it for free. I've had an illness and am better now, and so I'm beginning to reopen my coaching session. So if you want to have a session with me, you can go to my website, and there's a link there to follow. Finally, the last couple things is we're starting our organizational constellation course tomorrow. It is full, and we have a waiting list, so we're possibly opening up a second session. So if you're interested in being in the second group, then email me directly. So it's humansystems.institute@gmail.com. And we'll put you on the waiting list as we see if we're going to pull that one together. Finally, the West Coast Constellation Intensive with Leslie Nipson, Susie Tucker, and me has moved online. So Leslie has adapted, and we're going to take all the great content we had. Our theme was falling apart to come together, and we had no idea when we created that theme how prescient it was going to be. So I hope you'll consider joining us for that 3-day online intensive. So thank you so much for joining us. I hope to see you again, and stay well. I'd love to have some comments or feedback in the chat if you feel like posting something. Love to see the chat, and I'm going to stop my sharing right now. So if you have some feedback from today or just suggestions of things that you'd like to have us pick up as topics, please feel free. I'm watching the chat right now, or questions. I'm open for questions if there's questions about what I presented. And please feel free to pile on into the chat there. And um, it's lovely to see some of your names again. I haven't seen some of you for a while. And yeah, so thank you so much. So